Hi, everybody. This is a talk about a topic that got a revamp with the newest ASP.NET, but the core of it is has been available for quite a few years, even though, in my opinion, of a dev on the battlefield, it didn't get a relevant amount of attention from the people. So I'm here today in this 30 minutes talk to show how tag helpers in ASP.NET Core can make your Razor views really easier to read, to the point that the content of an HTML-based Razor view and C#-based Razor view can really look like something that a human can really read and understand at first glance. So, if we use ASP.NET, we are accustomed to play with Razor views. And Razor views are made by CHTML files that contain a mix of HTML and C# code. Because the content of the C# HTML file is HTML based, regardless of any JavaScript and CSS framework you can use on top of it, whether it's Bootstrap, Tailwind, Material, it's still HTML. And it still results in a sort of a mess that is tightly and strictly dependent on using the wrong tool for the job. But we cannot do without HTML, like it or not. At the moment, at the current state of the art, we have to go through HTML to build any web-based views. And Bootstrap, Material, Tailwind, and other frameworks attempt to give us higher level tools, but still these higher level tools, there's concepts like components in Bootstrap, components in Material UI are still made of HTML, and most of the time you have to incorporate in your Razor view in ASP.NET applications the full bloat of HTML. HTML itself was originally devised for rendering out text documents, and over the years it was extended. The core of the language, the markup language, was extended to provide basic layout, components like div or tables or input elements, but still at the end of the day, HTML is not good for, it's not ideal for rendering complex views as those that modern applications need. In this context, frameworks like Bootstrap or Material attempt to define a higher level taxonomy of UI elements that are common today in web pages, things like drop-downs, panels, cards, navbars, modules, and so forth. But still, those things are making our pages full of HTML. So we are not okay, because Bootstrap and analogous frameworks still, with all the effort they can put in, are far away from an understandable, comprehensible, human intelligible language for expressing the content of a view. So we would like ideally to have, for modals, tab strips, panels, cards, we would like to have things without the unavoidably verbose HTML that ultimately renders it out. Now, there is no perfect solution. We don't live in a perfect world. Not everything here is ideal. Some people believe that web components, as defined by the W3C committees, are the future, are the best way to go. Others choose to go with Angular or React and use components specific of those frameworks. Blazor is, with the components in Blazor, is another way to go, but we are talking about switching from the plain infrastructure of an ASP.NET application towards incorporating completely different UI front-end frameworks. If we remain in the realm of ASP.NET, if we love server-side programming, tag helpers, though not the perfect solution, help a lot to mitigate the issue of having rich and unavoidably verbose HTML clogging up our views. The good news is that ASP.NET tag helpers are great full support from Visual Studio in terms of highlighting, in terms of IntelliSense, give a great contribution to make our CSS HTML files much easier to read, and they are nothing more than server-side HTML factories that, once embedded in CHTML files, look like custom HTML elements. So, if we want to have something like this, a sample div-based card in our pages. Here is the code that you need to have if your page is based on Bootstrap 5. So you see we have 1, 3, 2, 3, 4, 5 nested divs, then a piece of text, then the other div, a few of the div tags close, and another one appears with the call auto class attribute. Magically, at the end of the day, you get exactly what you designed it for. But I challenge you to look at this piece of CHTML and guess what comes out once the page is rendered. But here is a sample tag helper alternative. The output is exactly the same, but the markup is much, much easier to read. In first place, you know that you're rendering out a card, whatever card means to your ubiquitous language of the application. This card gets a type attribute which defines the color of the left side bar, a title, and a text, 2 pieces of content to show in the card, the icon that automatically goes at the right edge of the div, and class properties to style both the icon and the text. It's exactly the same output, but the impact on what you understand at first glance is completely different. Now, how is it possible to have this piece of magic? So let's take a look again at the original Bootstrap-based code, and in the corner of the screen you see the...
Hey, Dino, just let me interrupt here. We're not seeing the slides change at all. I don't know if you're got...
really?
Okay, there we go. Yeah, so, okay, seeing it change now. I assumed that you wanted us to be able to see the slides change, so I just wanted to point out that we weren't seeing that.
So you say that I'm not sharing the right screen?
Probably not, no. We're just seeing your PowerPoint, you know, the view that you see as the presenter.
Okay, so I guess that when you don't see nothing at the moment, right?
I see your screen, but your PowerPoint editing window, not the slideshow window.
Okay, so let me see if it's if I can find a way. There should be a way to switch to this show presenter view, maybe. Anything different now?
No, I think if you, I mean, we can see that if you want to just show them through this way, this is fine. We can see them just by seeing it on the screen that you are sharing. If not, you can remove this screen and share again. But
okay, so like this.
Yeah, just do it like this.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks,
Good.
Dino.
I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
No problem. Live TV.
Okay, so now we're trying to figure out how to map parts of the original markup, Bootstrap-based, to the tag helper attributes. So we see, for example, following the arrow, that border primary goes straight onto the value of the type attribute in the tag helper, or maybe text primary and text XS goes into the title class, or the title component, the title text that goes into the value of the title property and so forth. So it's a sort of, to build a tag helper, it's like templatizing a known and approved HTML template. So you start from what produces what you want, approved by all the internal committee doing UI and UX stuff. And once you agree on, we want this and we want to reuse this piece of HTML all over the application, with its well-identified variable parts, you just essentially find a way to express the syntax you like. So we would like to have a way to change the color of the border, the title and the text, or two levels of text content within the components, and style a few elements here and there and add an icon. So the syntax of the markup for the new card element is completely up to you, and you are welcome to shape that the way that fits your needs. But you can do much more than just using a single level tag helper like the card element. You can have nested elements within a custom component. So let's take a look at another piece of a Bootstrap code which renders out, as you can see in the red part, a drop-down. So classic Bootstrap drop-down button with a text, a chevron, an arrow icon, and then a dropping menu. In this particular example, the dropping down content is split in two parts. The sum content area, which represents some static content at the top, or maybe at the bottom, if you like, of the drop down, and then the items, the clickable items. A sample way to express the same concept, this drop down, in a human-readable markup could be one possible way, could be what you see under the sample tag helper section of the slide. There is a drop-down element with a classic class style, pure HTML class style, and then some custom, you see the different color, coming right from Visual Studio support for tag helpers. Text icon, rightmost caret, BTN. Those are all attributes that whose value replaces specific pieces of the original Bootstrap template, producing in the end the same result. The markup custom child content renders out with its specific red background and the sum content text sample provided, the content you want to see optionally at the top of the drop down, and then the list of items with the type. It's a link, it's plain text, it's a divider, the URL to jump to, and then the label, and possibly also an icon. So the fact that you might want to render complex pieces of UI finds support in the tag helper concept, because you are not limited to one level components, but you can nest child items, child markup components, just to render out in the most flexible way what you have, what is the piece of UI element you have in mind. And now, C# code. What is a tag helper? It's a class. As simple as it can be. It's a plain class that inherits from a system-provided class, ASP.NET Core provided class, which is the tag helper class. So you write your own custom class, inherits from a tag helper, and you decorate the class with a special attribute, HTML target element, and you give this element the name of the root markup element you want to have. So for a card element, you have the HTML target element and then the string card. You create the class and you define in the class two basic pieces of code. The list of public properties, like title, title class, icon with their own type, any primitive type is valid. You can also have it, you are invited to do that. You can also use enums. And then the public properties that you can happily and easily initialize to default values in the constructor of the class are composed together in the process method. The tag helper class provides an overridable process method, and all you do is essentially outputting within the body of the process method any string-based, you build a huge string that in the end looks like the original HTML template with variable elements embedded in it. I know it's not the perfect way of doing those things, but after, and this comes directly from my experience, after some trial and error on the same component, once all the bugs have been removed and the right amount of flexibility has been put in, they work really, really nicely and become part of your common language within the company, within the team that is developing a given application. Back to the structure of the process method, as you can see, the method receives two parameters, one representing the input DOM of the markup that you receive. So it's the card with all the custom attributes. So that is what the server-side environment reads. Okay, and then the output DOM, the output parameter, the tag helper output, is the Bootstrap-based or material-based or plain HTML-based DOM tree the browser will physically receive. So the process method is a translator between the high-level language of the tag helper to the standard canonical base HTML language. And in the body of this method, using the output.content append HTML, you essentially build up, like in a sort of higher level string builder component, you compose the final big HTML string that is correct and then renders out as if you put it originally in the page. Now let's take a look at the demo. I'm gonna go with, because it's very simple, I'm gonna go, and the time allowed is not that much. I'm gonna go through slides, but I will make sure that every single line of code that makes sense will fit into slides. So let's suppose we wanna have a QR code component. We want to see just the final QR code. By the way, I invite you, if the sizes of the screen allows that, to try to focus on, to scan the QR code with your phone, and you will really see the human-readable razor string. So we want to have a QR code component with a class, for example, giving just a border around the picture, the value to be encoded, and the size for the square containing the QR code. Preliminaries. So to achieve that, in first place, you need to have somewhere in a class library or directly in an application, class library, NuGet packages, all those things work, but you can even have a tag helper right into a folder of your application. Create a new class, let's call it QR code tag helper.cs. You might want to make sure that from the application, whatever application and whatever are the tag helpers you want to use, you have to link them to your project through the view imports file. Make sure that you have a tag helper with the name of the DLL of the assembly that contains compiled the tag helper. So these are then the class for this QR tag helper component looks like a list of public properties. In this example, you see value, class, style, size, encoding, and the Boolean show content. those public properties are mapped as tag attributes. So you can use enums, and you use the constructor to assign those properties, as you can see, a default value. So for example, our QR code has a default size of 200 by 200, and it encoded as UTF-8 and doesn't show content. Show content in the logic of this example is whether or not you want to see the actual text, GUID, whatever it is, printed under a small line below the image of the code. The process method is all in this slide, nothing more than this. As you can see, we save a few strings to contain the encoded version of the encoding property, just to make sure that nothing wrong ends up being processed and output to the HTML browser response, size and value. And then we use a Google service, the Google APIs, to render out the chart. Of course, you are welcome to use any other library you want to know to produce the code. In this case, we are generating an IMG tag that points to the Google Charts API.com, and we build up the URL, putting the encoding, the size, and the actual data. After that, we make basic changes to the output DOM. The output variable we receive within the process method, we change the tag name to div, because originally the tag name is QR, and we changed that. It's not QR, the DOM is not rooted in QR, but now the output DOM is rooted in div. We remove attributes.clear. All the attributes we received from the original tag helper markup, and we assign a dflex class attribute to the new div. So we are creating a container that is rooted in a div of dflex. And then within this div, we build up some markup. We decide the show content property, whether it has to be an empty string or a small div with centered text, a very small render that contains the actual content being encoded in the image. And then we put another div with all the style we may have received from the markup, and that contains a new AMG tag that points to the URL. And when everything is done, the content string has been built, we just append that to the stream that ends up being composing the response for the browser in the host page. In the end, the final result is in front of your eyes. We have a QR code, class border, the size 200, value Human-readable Razor. We have the image pictured, and what the browser actually renders out is shown below. It's an IMG tag with the source attribute pointing to a Google API's endpoint, properly formatted with a class that is bordered. Whatever border means, it's a sample. Bordered in this case is a custom class you have defined in your application, and also possibly some inline CSS styles. Now, to finish off the presentation, let's take a look at some more advanced scenarios. What if you want to build up a modal component? Something like a modal tag with an ID, centered or not, size being expressed through value of a custom enum, and large is the value of an enum. Notice that Visual Studio does the fantastic job. If the property is detected to be bound to an enum type, it shows via IntelliSense the various possibilities, and it also ensures that you type in the right name. So large is not exactly a string, is not accepted to be any string, but it has to match perfectly the public name of an enum value if size is declared on the tag helper class to be of an enum type. Okay, whether or not we want to see by default, the OK button to close up the modal. The content of the modal in this example is split through a container content element and then 3 child elements, a title, info, and footer for the header, the body, and the footer. Of course, all the names here are entirely up to you. Now, when you are going to build a tag helper component that has nested elements, it happens that every single custom tag that builds up the whole modal component has to be a distinct tag helper class. So we're going to have here 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 distinct classes, tag helper classes. 1 for modal, 1 for content, 1 for title, 1 for info, and 1 for footer. Each of these tags renders out independently, and the process method receives parameters that have methods to process those nested childs recursively. The point is, how can I pass information received at the root level of the custom tag helper down the stack of child elements? Is that possible, and how for the title tag helper to know what is the size of the modal, or what is the center, the value, or maybe the OK? So the footer element, for example, that is ultimately responsible for pushing out the OK button, how can he know if the OK value is true or false? To pass information down the stack, you create, and this is the purpose of the small box you see on the slide, you create a class. The naming convention is name of the tag helper and then context. You created this class and you define this class in your project. It's a plain DTO object, and you store into this modal context all the values you want to share with the child components, and then you add to the items collection of the context object, the first parameter that the process method receives, this instance of the object. With this trick in place, we can have the job done. Now, to finish off, final considerations about building tag helpers. And you see another example, fairly sophisticated, of a tab strip. The tab strip sample element has a property to indicate the ID, another one to indicate which of the child tabs has to be marked as active. The list of tabs with ID and title, and also disabled or not status. You can have a look at define the expected output below. Then a sidebar optional component that renders out some HTML content on the right edge of the tab bar. And then the tab panes, container tab panes element, and then a list of tab pane component, each of which through the ref attribute refers to a particular tab. The expected behavior, regardless of the differences in the CSS, the underlying CSS, is shown on the slide, and the final behavior is exactly the expected behavior from the tab strip. But you understand, you see immediately how readable the tag helper tab strip is compared to the amount of unreadable and verbose HTML you would need otherwise. That is the same HTML that the browser receives, except that is the process method of the tab strip component that makes itself responsible for producing that specific and hopefully correct complex tree of HTML. Considerations in red. Obviously, a tag helper is not handy to debug. Whether if you have to catch the wrong behavior, or some kind of wrong behavior, or maybe the fact that some CSS and layout produced are not what you expect, if you have to debug this kind of things, you will find out live when you test you debug the application, and you have to stop, investigate if the string, HTML string, is built the wrong way. So debugging is honestly quite problematic, and this is a fact. Also, even if you don't have bugs, but you just want to make changes to the final output, even minor CSS changes require you to rebuild and rebuild the application, rebuild the class library, or rebuild the application, or redeploy the package, or redeploy the entire application if you find that to be an issue in production. So you have to modify C# code, period, and recompile. Third point, inevitably, you get some CSS lock-in. Inevitably, because complex UIs typically require complex markup, and the CSS libraries like Bootstrap or Material or Tailwind help you with exactly that. So your tag helper reasonably will be bound to any of those frameworks. On the green side of the matter, you have unparalleled, unmatched expressivity and clarity, and the possibility of creating a sort of UI, ubiquitous language, within your application, within the team that develops the application. That's all. Thank you very much for your time. In case you want to play with some of these tag helpers, I invite you to check out this ubiquitous Bootstrap 5 tag helpers NuGet package, freely available, where you can find, based on Bootstrap 5 and Font 5, a number of predefined components like tab strips, molders, drop-downs, file uploads, auto-completers, cards, panels, and much more. It's about 30, 40 different components based on Bootstrap. In case of issues, feel free to contact me. You will find my contacts on the slides. Anyway, dino.esposito@creonet.com. Thank you very much, and enjoy.
Thank you, Dino. That's really great stuff. Very powerful use of tag helpers, and I agree it makes it very easy to see what the developers are expressing their intentions there without getting in the way. Great stuff, but we have to move on because we're a little bit over time. So thank you again.